So you've just connected your gear up to the sound system. You're ready to play at your gig. You hit play on the first track and it's a little bit too quiet. You're listening to the venue going, not sure about the volume. So what you do is you bang the trim up, throw up some volume on the master out, and it suddenly sounds loud. Now this might sound great and you might finally have the volume for that track, but in truth, this practice is absolutely dreadful for audio. So in this video, I'm going to be showing you the correct way to set up all your DJ gear so that you can always have the volume you need for the venue you're in, with loads of headroom above and always a clean signal with no distortion, and this will be professional and it will sound brilliant. It comes down to one thing, and that is gain control. If you have good gain control and you gain stage correctly through your setup, you will never clip, none of your audio will distort, and it will sound crisp and beautiful. And at the end of the video, I'm going to be dropping a tip that is always forgotten about in audio setup, so you don't miss it and you have the cleanest sounding audio. Let's go. What actually is gain staging is setting the gains at each point of your audio setup so that you can create as clean a signal as possible. You go from your decks to, say, your external mixer to the club setup, and throughout those stages you've got faders, gains, trims, etc. And you want to try and create the cleanest audio signal possible so that when you get to the master out at the end, you've introduced as little to no distortion as possible, but your sound is loud and clear, which means all you need to do is turn the master out up at the end and everything will get louder, sound bigger if it's needed, but it won't clip the audio and you won't start hitting the reds. Everyone's gone into the reds on their DJ decks, they've seen it on mixers. Essentially, when your audio is hitting the red, it means the audio is clipping. If you look at a waveform, it's sort of like that. Clipping is sort of taking the highest and lowest point of that waveform out, and you essentially end up with distortion or no sound at all, and it starts to ruin the track. Now, back in the analog days, clipping was used as a distortion technique to give the sound grit and distortion like in guitars. But with digital audio coming out of DJ decks, clipping is just removing that sound and you're losing some of the track. So we do not want that. We want to avoid that at all costs. So when it comes to gain staging, we gain stage each instrument that comes into the mixer separately. That is the beauty of the external mixer, because if you have a microphone, you can run that into a separate channel and you can set the gains on that perfectly with full control without affecting what you've done on your DJ decks. You can also run a phone in, a tablet, a Spotify playlist, whatever it might be. You can set them all separately so they all come out at the same level, but they're not affecting one another. Your master out like that, say it's there, you want to go a little bit louder, all you have to do is turn that up, but everything that's coming into the mixer, being played back there, is still really clean and you're still not hitting the reds on the mixer. That is what we're aiming for. So there's a few different types of inputs when it comes to gain staging that you need to be aware of when you're going into a mixer. You have XLR ins, which are these right here. These are known as mic inputs. Now, mic inputs are actually one of the lowest level inputs you get. They're quite low decibel, so they need quite a lot of gain to match line in. Line in is what you see below, which is a 1/4 inch jack normally, and they come in at 0 dB pretty much, which means they're very hot. The last input you might have is phono input, which isn't as common now because we're in the digital era. This doesn't actually have any phono, but on some DJM equipment and advanced DJ mixers, you will have a phono input. Make sure you don't confuse phono and line because they look exactly the same. Because if you put a line input in the phono one by accident, you can blow up the preamps in the phono, so don't do that. There'll also be a little metal ring on the back or something which is known as an earth, because vinyl gear needs to be earthed so it doesn't start shorting out and creating weird static. This master volume should never be at 0. It should never be at 0, and it should definitely never be past 0. If you're pushing your volume this far, you've got a different problem in your setup and something's going wrong, because you should be able to approach this nearby and it should be way too loud to even stand. Really, if you've got good amps and preamps, 1/4 should be loud enough for most venues and you shouldn't need much more than that. If you're having to boost this up, you need to look at the rest of your setup because it's something different that's going wrong. And when we're setting up gain staging, we're doing it properly, keep this at 0. Turn this up last. Don't have this sitting like that while you're messing around up further in the chain, because if you do something, all of a sudden it's going to come firing through the amps. It's going to be really loud and blow your eardrums out. So here we've got our setup for the gig that we're playing at. This is a very simple setup, but the idea still works the same. So when we're gain staging, we need to start where the music starts, work our way up and through, essentially follow the line across, work through here, out, and then we've got our speakers at the end here which are going off to the monitors. Always make sure to do gain staging for a particular instrument or device on a loud part of that device, because you want to find the peak of when it's at its loudest. Don't gain stage to its quietest, because then you'll get to a loud part and it'll be way too loud. On this particular bit of gear, all we have is a channel level. We don't see a master out. It's not the end of the world because you can look on your laptop. Trim, now this is common on all DJ gear. Now trim is essentially cutting back or attenuating the sound, that we're sitting comfortably in the yellows with a little bit of headroom in the yellows, not so much that like you're almost hitting the reds. You're gonna be comfortably in the yellows, high greens. And once you've done that, that's when you now set your master level out. Now on higher end gear, you'll see a master out dial like this in the middle, which will show you how much you're sending. On lower end gear, you can either check your laptop or sort of just follow it along. It doesn't really matter. So we want to send most of this. We want to be in this optimal range. Don't send everything, never send everything. Never a good idea, because you're sending absolute 0 to this and it's just going to be a bit too much. We just don't need to. So we set the level. We've decided how much of that level we want to send to the mixer. It comes out of the cables and now we're in our external mixer, right? We've wired it up. We all know the wiring's in the right place. So actually in this example here, we have an aux send and return on a small controller. It's actually hard to see the clipping when you're using an aux send and return, but here we have a little dial for it and we can attenuate it here. And this one would require a bit more use of the ears, I guess, because you won't have a clipping dial, because you won't have a clipping button, because it's a low end mixer. So you'll have to use your ears a bit more and judge on here. But what we could do, also, if you're using 1/4 inch and you've come in, say you've come in onto this one here, right? We've got this little tiny red button right there. Don't know if that can be seen on the camera. We'll have to do a close up with a picture. There's a little red button, and that's essentially a clipping button. You adjust the gain just so that you don't want to have that red lighting up. You want to be just below that, so it's not hitting, but it's still nice and loud. And to be honest, if it's just DJ decks you're using, you basically won't need to touch this at all, because it won't need any preamp, because it's coming in line level, and we discussed that earlier. So say we've come in here on a channel where we do have EQs and everything, because we've come in line level and we've set this really nicely, it's very unlikely that we're going to be clipping at all to the bass here. We come to the bottom and now we have what's known as the level or the gain dial for the track. On higher end equipment, this one might be a fader, similar to these, but it's a dial here, doesn't really matter. So what we're doing is we've taken it in, and currently what's being sent out the master is nothing, because this is on 0. So again, if you need to cut this channel out completely, throw that down like that and that'll cut out anything that's coming through that channel. We're going to adjust this up based on where 0 is and start to get a feel for the room. And at this point, you also need to adjust your master level up to give you some feel in the room. And that's when you'll see your dial light up here as well. Now obviously you can see red actually says here clip. We don't want to be clipping. On a small dial like this, green is good, yellow's probably a little bit too loud anyway, but we want to be sitting somewhere in there if we can. Always adjust from here. Don't turn this up to try and make everything louder, because this is not the one you want to be turning up too much. This shouldn't really go above 1/4 to sort of, 4/5 or something like that of 0. Adjust from here till you get a nice volume, and when it's coming out nice and loud, and you don't need to be moving this to get it louder, you've got a good gain set. And then you can look at your speakers and adjust this for the volume of the venue. Like if it's early doors, you want to keep it low because people can talk and have a drink, turn that down, and then you want to crank up the party, as it were, turn that up, and you're good to go. But yeah, adjust from here. Now, the beauty of gain staging is if you bring other things in as well. Say we did bring a microphone in on this XLR, we can gain stage this microphone, like I said, with the clipping dial, EQ the mic out if we want, cut a bit of the low out, boost the mids, etc. Come down to here, we can set the mic level differently, gain stage separately, but they're both very clean coming out of the master, and this won't affect either one. And that's how we get a super clean signal, and that's what we're looking for. Ideally, if you can get this perfect and send out a clean signal to the mixer in the club, you shouldn't have to do much on there either. And one of the big things to look out for is not assuming that gain just means volume. Don't turn the gain up or the trim up just assuming that means you're going to get more volume, because that's not really how it works. Well, that's what it sounds like, that's not what it's actually doing. You're just boosting the heat of a digital signal. And that's sort of what the setup looks like. We work from the decks where the music starts, we follow up the deck, out of the master, into the channels we want, or the sends. At the bottom, set the gains if we need to in the preamps, adjust the volumes, master out, done. So the one thing that I think is always missed when gain staging is the consideration of your speakers or preamps. So everyone knows whatever you're playing into your speakers, right? You've got your decks, mixer, whatever it is, plugged into the speakers. The speakers are the things playing the music out to the audience. Speakers come in two forms. You've got active and you have passive. Now, active means there's a preamp in the speaker that's amplifying that sound as it comes into it, and it's projecting it out. At the back of those speakers, normally there'll be a dial that's basically like a volume, as it were, and you can turn that up. Now, in passive speakers, they won't have any dials on them. All the speakers essentially is a cone that is projecting out that sound that comes into it. The way the sound comes in at the level it's needed is from a preamp, and the preamp is doing the work. If you get this part wrong, no matter how loud you turn up stuff on your decks and your mixer and the gain, and you boost everything up, it's never going to be loud enough. That's the problem, and everyone misses that stage. It's so common. I've seen it at venues I've played at. So you're at a nightclub and the venue's been assessed that you need a 1500 watt output to play at a super high, too loud volume. Like that's gonna be ear deafeningly loud, right? 1500 watts. And what you've done is you've gone and got two speakers that both have 1000 watt output. So your total output for the venue is 2000 watts, right? You need 1500 to be playing at super max volume, which is too loud, which really means you probably only need 1000 to maybe 1200 watts to get a really good volume for that club. Now, if you set your preamps so low that you're only playing at like 750 watts and it's not really filling the club out because you've got them both at 10%, no matter how much you adjust on here, any of these dials, any of the dials on your like main DJ decks, it won't matter. All you'll end up doing is introducing distortion and clipping into the setup that we spoke about earlier, and it still won't get any louder in the speakers because it will come through louder to the speakers, and the speakers will go, oh, you've set me at 10%. It will just convert that down to 10% of 1000 watts and send that out. That is why you need to set your preamps or your speakers correctly. Just set your speakers at 35, 40% if they need to. If you really need to amp it up, you can turn those up a bit to 50% and you're still getting the loudness, and you don't need to adjust all your gains and dials on your mixers and setup. We spoke about it earlier. If your master out is approaching 0 and it still sounds too quiet, turn your speakers up, not your master out. Get that back down to like a quarter. And a good tip when it comes, if you are running your own speakers and preamps, is don't run them super hot. If you want to play 1000 watts total, get each one that plays 1500 watts. You know, give it some headroom, because you don't want amps, you don't want speakers working at like 100%, 90% all the time, because it's going to fry them a lot quicker. It's going to fry the electrics a lot quicker. You want them working at 50%, even maybe a little bit less. So that is a tip I can give you. I've sort of rambled on a little bit about it, but I think it's really important. Set your preamps / your speakers correctly. And if you're playing at a venue where you feel like it's quiet and you've listened to all this and you've still gone, it's not my gain staging, that's correct, speak to someone that works there, because you might be able to look at the speakers and you'll notice, oh, the speakers are set to 10%, and you just turn those up a little bit and it will come up so much better. You just need to be aware of that, and if you are aware of it, it might help you at venues where the sound has not been correctly established and all this sort of stuff. It's just good to know, because you're in DJing, you're in music, so knowing more about audio and setup is vital and important and worth doing.